So, what are some of the factors that can affect supply? So, we call them determinants of supply. So, these are some of the determinants of supply: input prices, technology and productivity, expectations of future prices, number of sellers, and the prices of related goods. So, let's talk about it one by one. Input prices. What are inputs? Inputs are also known as factors of productions. So many of you probably know inputs as factors of productions. They are resources that are used to produce goods and services. Some of the examples of inputs are workers or labor, raw materials, right? For example, copper that goes into electronic appliances, cotton that goes into our clothes, and then all these grains that goes into our food, okay? Poultry that goes into our food, okay? And so on and so forth. And then there are capital goods such as machines, equipment, and so on and so forth. And then there is land. In economics, a lot of times when you use the word land, we do not just mean literally land. A lot of times we also include, natural resources that come with it, such as oil reserve, coal reserves, forestry, and so on and so forth. Um, so, in order to make goods and services, in order to make output, firms need to use inputs. These inputs are not free. So they go into the cost of production or the cost of doing business. An increase in prices of inputs increases the cost of production. Okay? So let's look at an example. A labor strike drives up the production cost of cars. What may happen to the supply of cars? So, similar to what we did for the demand side, for every one of these exercises, you would probably want to pause the video for a few minutes so that you can work on these exercises on your own. That is to get the best out of these video clips. So let's pause the video for a few minutes. So let's look at the question. A labor strike drives up the production cost of cars. What may happen to the supply of cars? Workers, every time there's a strike, well, I guess most of you know what what a strike is. When there is a strike, workers don't want to work, and it turns out to be very costly because while these workers don't go to work, there are the business. There are other expenses that the business has to incur. For example, the business will still have to pay the rent, although they make nothing. They will still have to pay the insurance, although they produce nothing. And most importantly, they may have signed a contract to deliver a shipment. So with a strike, it is very likely to delay the shipment. So it is probably a breach of contract that can cause a lot of penalties. So all in all, a strike is very costly. Okay? So what may happen to the supply of cars? This is likely to lead to a decrease in the supply of cars. Okay? So once again, you want to make sure you label your diagram very clearly so that we know which market we are referring to. So the price of cars and the quantity of cars. Okay? And then as the production cost of cars goes up, we are likely to have a decrease in the supply. There's two ways to look at this. One way to look at this is, suppose the price of cars is held constant, so car makers charge their customers the same price as before, okay? With an increase in the production cost, it is less lucrative to produce a car. So as a result, car makers have incentive to make fewer cars. So we have a leftward shift of the supply curve. Another way to look at it is, if we want the car makers to make the same quantity of cars as before, okay, so keep the quantity constant, then because of the increase in the price of inputs, okay, car makers are likely to ask for higher price. Okay, so either way, you have a leftward shift of the demand curve. Okay, so let's move on to the next determinant of supply: technology. So when it comes to technology in economics, technological changes in economics, it doesn't necessarily have to be fancy. It doesn't necessarily have to be rocket science all the time. It can be as simple as changing the way that people do things. Okay? So technological changes that improves the productivity of inputs or lowers the cost can increase the supply. Okay? So when we look at technology, obviously a lot of times we are looking at technological progress. Okay? Technological progress that can improve the productivity of inputs or lowers the cost of production. But do bear in mind that sometimes we may have technological drawbacks or setbacks that will be counterproductive, that will lower the productivity of inputs and increases the cost of production. So here's an example. Ford has launched a new assembling process that can increase the number of cars produced in a factory. What may happen to the supply of cars by Ford? Once again, I would like you to take a pause the video, and work on this for a few minutes. So a new assembling process is a technological change. And in this question, we are told that it can increase the numbers of cars produced in a factory. So obviously, it increases the production. Okay? So for every single price level, okay, we can see that Ford is more willing and able to sell more. Therefore, we have an increase in the supply. Okay? I'm saying all these in words, but when you try to do a homework or answer questions in your exams, you do want to make it a habit to write it out in words, to explain it briefly. Okay? So we see an increase in the supplies of cars by Ford. The next determinants of supply is the expectations. Is the expectations of future prices of the output. If the firms expect the price of the products to go up in the near future, they may not want to sell as much now. Does that make sense? So imagine yourself as the owner of a gas station. So remember, so just imagine you get some inside information. By the way, obviously trading on inside information in the United States is illegal. But assuming that you get an insider information which is reliable, so you know that the price of gas is going to go up sharply in the next couple of weeks. What are you gonna do? Are you going to sell as much as usual? Are you going to sell more now? Or are you going to sell less now? So remember, gasoline is storable, right? So most likely you are going to hoard your gasoline, right? You want to keep as much gasoline as possible, wait for a couple of weeks so that you can reap the profit, reap a higher profit. Okay? So let's look at examples. Companies are anticipating shortage of oil that would drive up the price of gasoline in coming months. What may happen to the supply of gasoline? So most likely, gas stations, gasoline companies are likely to hoard all these gasolines. So currently, we are going to see a decrease in the supply. So we're going to see a decrease in the supply. Okay, so that is illustrated by a leftward shift of the supply curve. The next one is pretty straightforward, so I'm not gonna linger on that too much. As we have an increase in the number of sellers in the market, we are likely to observe an increase in the supply of goods. Okay, so that's a rightward shift of the supply curve there. And then the last determinant of supply that we will cover is the price of related goods. So we talk about price of related goods when we cover the demand side, but this time it's slightly different. We're not looking at related goods from the point of view of consumers. We're looking at related goods from the points of view of producers. Okay? So take, for example, corn and soybeans. So corns and soybeans use almost the same resources, same type of soil, same type of planting, and so on and so forth. Okay, so what will happen to the supply of corns if the price of soybean goes up sharply? So once again, let's take a pause for a few minutes so that you can work on this exercise, and we'll come back to it. So corns and soybeans share the same amount of resources. It's not the same amount of resources, same type of resources. Okay. So imagine you as a farmer. Imagine yourself as a farmer. So you're seeing that the price of soybean goes up sharply. What would you do? Okay. Most likely you would want to plant less corns. You want to allocate the resources to planting soybeans. So as a result, the supply of corns decreases. So we have a leftward shift of the supply curve. So I am going to leave you with two short exercises. So this is very similar approach as we did for the demand side. So consider the market for mean events, identify which of the determinants of supply is affected, and indicate an increase or decrease in supply. So just like what we did for the demand curve, it is good to go slowly. So the first step is likely to identify the determinants of supply that is most relevant here, and then we can go from there. And you also want to try to answer these questions with the help of a supply curve.